A true holiday treat this morning, a literary giant joining us for early coffee. John Irving's novels are American treasures, works like The World According to Garr, The Hotel New Hampshire, A Prayer for Owen Meany, and The Cider House Rules, for which, of course, he also won an Oscar for Best Adapted Screenplay.
But did you know this man of words is in the National Wrestling Hall of Fame? His latest novel, The Last Night, in Twisted Rivers in bookstores right now. We want to welcome, a very special welcome to John Irving, who is here on The Big Show and joining us for early coffee this morning. John, great to see you. How are you?
Thank you. I'm good.
I guess the big question everyone out there is probably asking right now, what do you like better, the writing or the wrestling? I mean, where is your real passion here?
Well, I don't wrestle anymore. I'm 67. I did it for 20 years and coached until I was 47. But I give it credit for giving me a lot of discipline as a writer. I think that I learned how to enjoy repetition by wrestling as long as I did, and writing is mostly an act of rewriting, and there's a lot of repetition involved.
And you've always said that's really been the key to writing, is it's 1/8 talent, 7/8 discipline.
Well, I look at it that way. I never felt that I was especially talented at anything. I felt that I had a capacity to keep doing something again, to look at it a second, a third, and a fourth time, and I just tried to develop what I felt I was good at.
But you enjoy it, right?
I do enjoy it. No, I don't mean to make it sound like it's laborious. I don't mean that at all. I just mean that any craft is a discipline first and foremost,
right.
and so you have to like it for itself. You can't just like the end product. You have to like the rewriting, just the way you have to like the rehearsals, not only the performance. You have to like every part of it.
Every part of what goes into it, and it's such an intense craft too. I'm always fascinated by writers and how you develop not only your stories and your characters, but your research. This book in particular took you, was it 20 years to write?
Well, it's misleading to say that I was working on it for 20 years. The idea for this novel has been in my mind longer than any novel I've written. Yes, 20 years. But I never begin writing a book until I see the last sentence. And the last sentence to this novel eluded me for a very long time. So I began other novels that hadn't been in my mind nearly as long, because those last sentences were
right.
more quickly forthcoming.
I have to ask a question about the last sentence, because I always wonder whether or not this bothers authors. But you read sometimes about, and when Harry Met Sally is a perfect example in the movie, and Harry says, I always read the end of the book first, because that way if I die, I know what happens. You know the end of the book first. Does it ever bother you to learn that your readers may want to skip ahead and find out and then go back and finish the book?
Well, I think it's a good habit to have as a writer and a terrible habit to have as a reader. If I saw some reader peeking at the end of my novel in a bookstore, I'd slap it out of their hand,
You've always said that it's most important to keep the reader as interested on page 320 as it is on page 32. How do you do that with each book? This is your 12th novel right now, which we're going to talk about in the next few moments. But how do you do that with each piece of literature to make sure that interest stays?
Well, it was those long, plotted novels of the 19th century that made me want to be a writer in the first place. Dickens, Hardy, Melville, Hawthorne. And if you're going to tell a long story, usually where the passage of time is of considerable importance to the story itself, you better have a kind of momentum that gathers emotionally for the reader. The reader has to have a stake, an emotional stake in what's going to happen to these characters, because what's going to keep them going past 400 or 500 pages if they're not emotionally and psychologically needing to know what's going to happen to this man, what's going to happen to this woman, what's going to happen to this child. So I think there's always an element of something to be afraid of in my novels. You're afraid of something happening to someone.
And oftentimes it's afraid of a death of a child. So is that one of your main fears? Is that something that's always concerned you?
Well, I have 3 children and 4 grandchildren, and nothing gives me more fright than the thought of something happening to one of them. And so it wasn't an act of genius to sort of translate that into storytelling. I think that when I was still a college student, when my first child was born, I didn't exactly feel fortunate for that occurrence. But as a writer, I was very lucky to have been such a young father, because I had my subject, essentially the anxiety of losing someone you love. And that's been repeated now in 12 novels in one way or another.
Do you enjoy it when people ask you, Garp, is that you? Danny Angel, is that you?
Well,
And if you don't, I'm sorry for asking that question. If you do, add me to the list.
I accept it as inevitable. If you manage in a work of fiction to make people feel that what's happening is real, that these people are real, that you care about them the way you do for people you actually know and have grown up with, well, if you can pull that off imaginatively and make something that is totally made up feel real, it's inevitable people are going to say, well, something about this must be true. Something about this must have happened to you. And whatever that autobiographical element is going to come under scrutiny. We are, after all, living in a nonfiction world. It's only natural that people would look at what affects them most in fiction and wonder if it doesn't have some real life origin.
You talk about having a hard time over the last 20 years finding the last sentence for this latest book. What was it? Why was it so difficult, do you feel?
Well, before I know what that last sentence is, I usually know what the tone of voice to it is. Is it melancholic? Is it pretty? Is it dialogue, in which case is it an echo of something we've heard in the story before? Is it uplifting? And because I knew what happened in this story, which is not uplifting at all, it's a sad story, I couldn't understand why the last sentence sounded so elated. And I thought I must be mistaken. I thought I was on the wrong track. So I kept putting it aside and putting it aside. I didn't realize that it was a sentence about the act of writing itself, and that the surviving main character to this novel, there's only one thing that can make him happy, which is starting a book again. That's what makes him happy. And I was confusing what he does for his life with his life. You see what I mean? So it escaped me for a while.
One of the things, too, I imagine that would take a while as well with this book is the research alone. Because, or with any book, and Chris and I were talking about this a little earlier this morning, it's got to be such an intense process, especially when you're talking about, for example, an 1850s logging camp. I mean, where do you even begin trying to learn about what life is like in that environment when I'm guessing there's not a lot written down about it?
No, it's pretty much, the history of logging is pretty much an oral history, but I'm fortunate in that my cousin is still in the logging business. My uncle was always in the logging business in northern New Hampshire, and my cousin was instrumental in putting me in touch with a number of old-time river drivers, people who drove logs down those big New Hampshire rivers, the Androscoggin and the Ammonoosuc, back in the 50s. And some of these guys who were still alive were able to talk to me. My cousin took me back into the tumble-down remains of a logging camp up there in Coos County. So I had some access to the research that was necessary for this book that I don't often have. Other novels have been tougher research-wise. The medical novels, the medical detail about obstetrics and gynecological procedure in the Cider House Rules, the medical detail in A Son of the Circus, that was a lot more foreign and formidable to me. That took a lot longer than this one.
Does it ever change your story? I mean, I know you have that last sentence first, but does it ever change the vision you have of getting to that end place that you have in mind if you learn something within the research?
It never has. I'm thoroughly prepared that it might. That I might find something out in the research that really has to alter my thinking about the ending of the story. But that hasn't happened in 12 novels. And I've already got the ending from my 13th novel, and I'm already close to 3 chapters into it. So I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon.
So it's not lucky number 13 either.
No, I'm not superstitious about that.
But you never know.
Not about numbers.
When you look over your career, biggest achievement, if you had to pick one, could you pick one? Would it be the Oscar? Would it be the success after Garp? I mean, what do you look back on it and think has been your crowning moment so far?
Well, I just think I've been extraordinarily lucky in an accumulative way. It may sound ordinary, but nothing has given me as much involvement, as much a sense that I'm alive as my children's lives. That's reflected in what I write. I think I was lucky that I didn't get successful as a writer too soon.
Yeah.
We're a youth culture in this country. We tend to worship the success of first novelists, and if you're not successful as a first novelist, it's tough to publish a second one now.
Yeah.
It's tough to publish a third. I was lucky in the sense that it was my fourth novel, The World According to Garp, that made me self-supporting as a writer, so that I didn't presume that I was going to be self-supporting. I presumed I was going to be a college English teacher and a wrestling coach for the rest of my life, and scrounging to find the time to be a writer on the side. Most writers live that way.
How did that success change your life after the success of The World According to Garp, if at all?
Well, in no particular order of importance, I got divorced. I don't know if that was a result of becoming famous, or if that would have happened anyway. I discovered that now that I could be a full-time writer, it wasn't as easy as I thought to write 8 hours a day, when I'd only had an hour and a half or 2 hours a day to do it, and suddenly I got what I wanted. Now you can be a writer all day.
Yeah.
For the first book I wrote after The World According to Garp, I discovered that I still couldn't write for more than 3 or 4 hours a day. So I was really disappointed in myself. So the first thing that happened to me when I became a best-selling author was a series of disappointments. And, you know, it's easy to say from hindsight that that was also useful, or that I learned from that. And by the time I got to my 6th novel, The Cider House Rules, I could write for 8 or 9 hours a day. But you have to learn how to expand your concentration span. If you've never had more than an hour and a half a day to do something, and someone says, okay, now you can do this for 8 or 9 hours, guess what?
Yeah.
All goes back to
It
that
doesn't
discipline.
happen. It doesn't happen overnight. You can't go from running the 220 to being a marathoner the next day.
All right, John, guess what? We now have a surprise for you. It's called the lightning round. Okay, so we're going to ask you some rapid-fire questions. We're looking for
And you're
rapid-fire
expecting rapid-fire.
We are.
responses.
You think I write short novels?
We're going to see exactly how good you are at this, okay? First question for you right now.
Is this like an SAT
This is
exam?
our lightning round. Square root of pi. No, I'm kidding. If you could have coffee with anyone, who would it be?
Oh, any one of my children.
I love that answer. If you weren't a writer, if you hadn't had that success, what do you think you would be?
I'd still be a wrestling coach. That's the only other thing that I was moderately successful at.
What is the worst thing about being a famous author?
You attract the greatest lowlife of book reviewers, so that the act of being reviewed itself is often one of being condescended to by your inferiors.
What's the best thing about it?
You get to stay home and not leave the house and do what you want.
That 8 hours a day?
You get to work in your slippers and your PJs?
Of all your novels, which is your favorite?
I don't have favorites, but I will say this, that of the 12 novels, any one of the last 7 is better made than any one of the first 5, because I was a full-time writer, and I could attend to it better.
You split your time. We're a couple of, well, Chris is New England by college. I'm New England by birth. So a couple of New Englanders, so we share your love for New Hampshire. I know you actually split your time now between, I believe, Vermont and Canada.
That's correct.
Do you have a preference for New England over Canada? Is there one place that draws you more?
Well, my wife is Canadian, and a part of our life that we enjoy very much, an apartment in Toronto, an island in Georgian Bay, Lake Huron. It's such an important part of our life, those two places, that I don't really decide between living in Canada and living in Vermont what I like better. Let's just say that I'm glad Obama was elected, because if the other guys had won, I might have moved to Canada.
And finally, last question for you. Least popular University of New Hampshire alum sitting here on this couch right now. Okay, just by your laughter, I know you're talking about me. I know you're talking about
I'm not going there.
I can take myself out of the equation. I'm a Boston University girl.
we have a gift waiting for you. Mitch, bring that up here for a second. We've just got a little something before we let you go, because we are such big fans of yours and so happy that you were able to join us here. We know how much wrestling means to you, so we got you your very own wrestling lead. No,
A singlet.
that was a joke. That was a joke. Here, a little something as a little special thank you.
Oh, that's very nice.
Next time
show.
you feel like donning the warm-up, we know it's obviously a little cold up there in Vermont, so throw this on. A few long johns.
Someone overestimated the length of my arms, but that's all right. You know?
We can resize that for
We
you.
can
hands
refer you to a
warm too,
fantastic
right?
seamstress, don't worry.
But John, thank
Okay.
you. Thank you very much. Seriously,
Thank you.
such a pleasure. Such a pleasure to have you
Thanks
with
for
us.
Thank you.
having me. Okay.